Nice. Okay, we're off to the races. We're recording. I should have taken a sip of tea first, but as this is the podcast where I drink tea into the microphone, I'm going to start with that. Excellent. Very refreshing. Welcome, David. Great to have you back. I think I shared the podcast interview you and I did on your podcast, The Hardy Brain, here as well. So this will probably not be the first time people have heard your voice, but let's have you say hello just so that people can hear it again.
Hey Adam, how you doing today?
Good. Whoa, excellent voice. Great timbre.
Excellent.
Cool. Well, so we were kind of back in this conversation because I enjoyed the conversation you and I had. It sounded like we had maybe some parallel, some overlap, some alignment in some of like our philosophies of maybe mind or approach or how people operate or any of that stuff. So I thought, oh, what a cool place for us to like explore further. So
Yeah.
maybe you can like start by this is like a dangerous thing to ask people, but like giving like a very brief description of what you do, and then tell us a little bit like how did you get into the work that you do?
Yeah. So I'm in functional neurology. So I look at ways to physically hack the brain and nervous system to get people better and performing at a higher level.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, I kind of got into it like most things, kind of by accident. I was in education and I taught in Australia, Japan, and Canada, and then went into chiropractic school. And
Huh.
at that point in time, I was thinking more kind of sports related injuries and things. And I got down there to the school in Atlanta, and I realized and found out there's so much more in this field than I was exposed to up in Canada here.
Hmm.
And one of them being functional neurology. And one of the head doctors just happened to be on campus, and he was treating Sidney Crosby and all the star NHL players with their concussions. And this is like over a
Nice.
decade now ago. So, like before concussion work really had the spotlight or was just developing that spotlight. And when most people weren't really sure what to do with concussion injuries. And he was just nailing it out of the park.
Huh.
And then, well, you see Sid's career now, and geez, wow.
Yeah, no kidding. So,
Right?
well, oh, go ahead, please.
Oh yeah, and not just the athletes. Like there was all sorts of bizarre neurologic conditions that were getting treated in this facility that were just blowing, and the athletes were not to say less exciting cases, but the progress in all of the patients pretty much were just mind-boggling, and I
Hmm.
just completely got addicted to it. I'm like, yeah, this is what I need to be doing.
Wow, fascinating. So initially, like, so if I'm following the story well, this is where you veer off of chiropractic. Is that right?
No, it's still a part of chiropractic care.
Ah,
So in the US, it's considered a specialty within the field, though. So
interesting.
yeah, basically, like if we look at all these alternative modalities, though, and why they work, well, everyone has their theories on it, but the basic simple one is that it stimulates a receptor, fires
Hmm.
through a nerve that goes someplace into the brain. And instead of just following protocols that have seemed to kind of help people out throughout the years and decades and centuries, um, why not look at the neurology and then trace it back to the areas of dysfunction in the brain before you go into what exercise stimulation modality you're going to use?
So when you say
And
trace them neurology, what does that mean?
so it means going through a full head to toe neurologic examination. And there's textbooks on the neurologic examination.
But
And
just so I'm clear, is neurologic meaning like nerve based? Is that what that word means?
oh, neurologic meaning, yeah, nervous system.
Got it.
So
Okay, got it.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
we're tracing like where is this, what pathways are being activated, where is this moving through the body? I'm asking not from me. Obviously, I know what all these fancy words you're using mean. I'm asking for some other member of the audience. I'm asking for a friend
No, yeah,
who doesn't
you're
feel dumb
spot
right now.
on.
Okay,
You're
got it.
spot on there. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, so I see. So I guess my layman's understanding was that chiropractic was more in the realm of manipulations in the skeletal system, but it sounds
Right.
like it has a broader range of application.
Oh, absolutely. And kind of depending what system you're in. Yeah, in Canada, it's more muscular skeletal based. Okay, well, yeah, your back's out of alignment. You need an adjustment type thing.
Right.
Whereas, yeah, if you look into kind of more of the philosophy behind it, the original chiropractic was on nerve interference.
Mm,
And the big thing though is the modality of having an adjustment is a huge stimulation to the nervous system.
right.
So it's a very impactful tool to help people get better. And yeah, you feel it. Whereas, yeah, sometimes with an exercise, you sort of feel it.
I see.
Aromatherapy, yeah, okay, well, I can feel and sense that. Light therapies, oh, okay, yeah, I'm getting that. But we sometimes drop off and say, oh, well, an adjustment, you're just affecting the muscles. Well, no, there's a big stimulation factor to that as well, which fires into those primitive parts of the brain and really kind of get things working again in
Mm,
a lot of cases. So it's a tool in the toolbox to get people better and a very important one.
gotcha.
And the
So
thing is,
go
with
ahead.
functional neurology, we can use other stimulations and exercises and really kind of, once again, target those areas of dysfunction, and our results go through the roof that way.
So what was this doctor doing? This that sort of got you became an addict. Like what were you?
Oh,
What actual stuff was he doing?
well, I'll give you one story. Like, yeah,
Please.
seeing the NHL players get back on ice was amazing.
Uh huh.
And then we're we're watching this one examination he's doing, and they bring the patient out who's in a wheelchair, electric wheelchair, and one hand's in the spastic posture, and he can't
Hmm.
move it, and his head is against a headrest,
Hmm.
and he can't move his head or neck, and he, he's been that way for over a decade.
Mm.
And we're listening to the history. He's gone to all the top university hospitals and everything. And then Carrick starts his examination and he goes through and he's like, oh, okay. And he tries just one simple little test from something he saw in the examination. And all of a sudden, you see the guy being able to move his head a little bit. And you're just like, wow, that just happened. And then by the end of the examination, the guy's moving his head around, looking down at his hand, opening his hand a little bit back and forth.
Mm. So what's
And then
the pathway that led like Carrick? Is that it? Carrick, Dr. Carrick?
Dr. Carrick was the one, yeah, we were
Right.
following it and watching him.
And what
He's
is
kind of
he
the godfather
doing?
of functional neurology.
Right. Okay. And so what is he doing? Like what's the pathway of action or what is he doing that's creating like basically I'm curious about the disconnect between what all of these other professionals were doing and what Dr. Carrick was creating, allowing, making happen.
Right. And a lot we're kind of looking from the surgical perspective or from a medication perspective versus a stimulation perspective.
Okay.
So
Can you lay that out a little bit more?
yeah, so these pathways, like the whole way the nervous system works to make it very simple is that information comes into the brain
Uh-huh.
from our senses, and then it's processed, and then we have an output. So it's input, processing, output is how the brain and nervous system work.
Hmm.
So if you kind of know what the inputs into the brain are, and then these different pathways for the processing, then you can read it from the output that brain has. And yeah, the output in this gentleman's case was that, yeah, he had this flexor posture, so something that you shouldn't have.
Hmm.
And when you stimulated those processing centers by using a sensory modality, um, it changed the motor tonicity.
I
And
see.
he was
By
able
which
to,
you mean like the what the muscle's doing in layman's terms.
exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. So was it a matter of just changing the input That's what Carrick was doing, as opposed to changing the way the brain's processing it or anything along those lines, like leaving the black box as it is and more just changing the input you're putting into it.
Well, you're using the input to change the processing.
I see. So there's a bit of
Yeah,
both.
exactly. So you're
Uh-huh.
putting that stimulation in, and yeah, it's the whole learning thing. So learning happens by repetition, right? So if you fire a nerve, neurons that fire together wire together.
Right.
And that goes with learning, like say a math problem, a sport, a musical instrument,
Yeah.
how not to have spasticity, how not to be dizzy, how to get rid of your brain fog, all these sort of things. Is that, yeah, if you can change by firing just the right input into the system to change that processing and then do it at a repetition that's going to make a change to that person, then boom, you change how that brain's firing and working, and more importantly, how that person's life is going.
Hmm. Okay, so you're hooked, right? You witness this, you're like, this works. This is what I
Yeah.
want to do.
Oh yeah.
So and now you talked about, like, at the top of the show you talked about sort of hacking our brains to be more efficient, effective. So slot that, how does that connect or integrate with what you like where you started?
Oh, exactly. And I had my own kind of epiphany and during chiropractic school, which was a long time ago now.
Yeah. How long?
But oh, geez, graduated 2013. So
Okay,
yeah,
so just shy of 15 years.
yeah,
Yeah.
somewhere around there, a dozen years or so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was seeing all these like quote unquote miracles, right? And then I'm like, well, I'm kind of ramped up, and I've had concussions myself,
Mm.
and I had learning disabilities growing up. So I finally set aside some time and money and went to one of the doctors who was teaching some of this stuff, and he puts me through this examination again, and he gives me these silly little goofy exercises, and he's like, "You're going to be doing these every single hour,
Uh-huh.
and, and then touch base in a week or so." So like in between classes, I'm like in hallways where no one's at doing these exercises or outside. And on day three, it was like a switch flipped in my brain. And
What
I,
are the exercise? Give us an example of the exercise.
yeah, we were doing different complex movements with some eye movements and quick head turns to stimulate the vestibular canal, so that inner ear balance center.
I see.
And in a combination and more kind of left cerebellar base, so that coordination part of your brain, and which is going to
Hmm.
fire into your right brain. And so I'm doing these, and day three, yeah, this switch flipped in my brain, and it was like just boom.
Mm.
I felt this calm come over me that I had never felt before in my life. Like my system was ramped up, like a lot of high performers, right?
Yeah.
You, high performers have problems with anxiety and everything else.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I was in that boat. And then the other really bizarre thing was my vision just went brighter and crisper right there on the
Mm.
spot. And like nothing to do with acuity. I still use glasses,
Yeah.
but things were just brighter and crisper. So like my ability to process that visual sensory information was dulled down. And when it got stimulated in the right way, it just came online. And
Mm.
it's kind of been my benchmark too of how I kind of read my brain function now is if my vision starts to kind of go dull, I know I need to get back into taking care of myself.
Interesting.
Uh,
Okay.
so
So go
for
ahead.
other people, it might be their brain fog. Oh, I'm starting to feel foggy, and I got better. Okay, well now I need to get back on track.
Uh-huh.
Or for somebody else, it might be their balance. So it is kind of individual there that what pathway is not working optimally or could be.
So did you have any like it sounds like a dream come true. I could imagine someone listening like, wow, I
Yes.
just like turned my head to the side and I, open my mouth and move my fingers a certain way. every day for a week, and then suddenly like my brain opens up and the light of God pours in, and all of that stuff sort of happens. So
Exactly. Yes.
um is it that simple? Is there like were there parts of this
No.
story for you that were challenging? Yeah, like tell us give us the other side of that picture then.
The hardest part is figuring out what part of the brain is dysfunctional
Tell us more about
and
that.
getting it correct.
Uh-huh.
Because it it does need to be precise. You're dealing with different pathways and a lot of pathways, and I'll use balance because there's a lot of balance disorders out there too, and people kind
Right.
of get this one. Is you got to
You mean
balance
physical
center.
balance, like
Yeah,
standing? Yeah. Okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like you've got a balance center on the left part of your brain and a balance center on the right part of the brain, and they're push pull. So if
Right.
one's overactive, then it's going to push, and then you get the spins type
Yeah. You
thing.
got a top,
Exactly.
spinning top. Yeah.
Or if one side that does like velocity, like speed, is a little up versus the other, you're not going to really feel a spin.
Uh-huh.
That's firing into all the higher centers as well. So it does make this change. The thing is, they both use the same chemicals.
Hmm.
So you can't treat these isolated imbalances with chemicals because the left side
You'll
uses the
flood.
same
Yeah.
chemical as the right side. So um, we've seen that. Like that's kind of why a lot of the drug models haven't worked with concussion and brain
Right.
injury.
Bit of a blunt force hammer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've all heard that old, outdated. Oh, it's a problem with neurotransmitters. Well, once again, neurotransmitters, the bulk of them are produced in the brainstem in these lower primitive areas and then fire up into your limbic centers and then into your frontal lobe cognitive areas. So there's a bottom up approach to the brain and nervous system. And if we're talking about serotonin, dopamine, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, all these neurotransmitters, it's kind of silly because we're not actually mentioning the parts of the brain that they're produced.
But
And
before we go too far down this path, so you said like the hard part is getting precise, like what's the input required
yes,
to. So how are you doing that? Like in the example you've provided, like the balancing, the out of phase, the imbalanced balance system.
yeah, and that goes down to the neurologic examination. And yeah, we use the same textbooks that a medical neurologist is going to use on the examination. The
Yeah.
difference is we're looking for these imbalances versus looking for a pathology to diagnose necessarily.
Uh-huh.
Is that okay? Well, yeah, there's an imbalance in this system. Okay, well, this nerve fires into this part of the brain that then goes into this area and circuit and then has this output. So a lot of it's going to be, yeah, those sensory tests, sensory motor tests. So balance, coordination, eye movements, sensory processing. All these things tell us about different parts of the brain, different pathways, and then we can kind of triangulate it back.
And then
And
how is it determined what to input? Like, has that just been a system of trial and error? And let's try turning your neck 5 times to the left and then 3 times to the right, or oh, it was actually 2 times to the like. How did that all get put together?
right, when you actually figure out the area that you want to exercise,
Yeah.
then you're checking it for fatigability. So same way if you were training somebody in a gym. Okay,
Yeah.
well, you can lift this dumbbell so many times and then it just kind of gives out on you.
So kind
Well,
of like the capacity. Is that what fatigability means? Like how much it can do before it stops, kind of before it fails?
exactly.
Got it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And then we will kind of back it down a little bit because we want to be as close to that point where things kind of stop without exceeding it.
Right. It's just
And
the metaphor of exercising a muscle, basically.
right, exactly.
Uh-huh.
And the thing with a muscle, though, is yeah, no pain, no gain.
Yeah.
Kind of works. With the brain, it's the opposite. The second you overstimulate it, you're causing more damage than good. So you
Right.
want to get it to that point, but not exceed what it can handle. And that's when somebody who's had an injury is a lot harder to rehabilitate than, say, a peak performer.
Right. Although I could see that this is very similar, like with a muscle, if I go to the gym and I try to lift like 200-pound weights with my biceps, I'm going to tear them and cut. It sounds like there's sort of like this optimal training or pushing beyond the existing capacity and having the ability to discern like what is the level at which that can we can work with that. Am I on the right track?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Huh. Cool.
Yeah,
So, one thing just to interject here is like as you're talking about this, David, I'm always like, are you familiar with the concept of like fractal? Something being fractal?
absolutely. But fire away.
Yeah, well, I love this how like so much of the body, everything, life, but like the human being is like fractal in so many ways. So like we can see this very clearly with muscles because you work out, you get big, all of that stuff happens, and it's very obvious. But then it's sort of like the same kind of underlying mechanisms of like put the system under pressure so that it can kind of grow, but not too much pressure because then it collapses under the weight, and like it's just cool how like the system is always teaching us, and often the lesson is quite analogous throughout the entire system.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah, huh, it's
Yeah,
really cool. Okay, so you're determining here's the system that's dysfunctional, as you I think you called it, or out of balance or whatever, and then so not to stick too much on the literal, but like how do we get to the point of like turn your head this like this way and do this? Like how does that exercise get put together?
uh, that kind of gets put together once again by what pathway or circuit we want to exercise,
Yeah.
and then we look at, okay, well, how many reps can it handle?
Uh-huh.
Okay, we're making a change, and we can see this subtle little change happening right in front of our eyes. And that's the beauty about working with the brain is the brain works in milliseconds.
Mm.
You know right away whether the stimulation is doing same, better, or nothing, right?
Uh-huh.
So, and then once you figure that out, it's a matter of, okay, adapting with the person, with their nervous system as they get better, because as they get better, you're going to have to make the exercises more intense, or you're
Uh-huh.
going to have to do more reps or do it for a longer duration. And all this is kind of working on the wiring side of the diagram. But of course, this is living tissue and it
Yeah.
still needs to be supported metabolically as well.
Right.
So if we're going to use the gym analogy, yeah, you're doing the exercises, but you still need breathing,
Food.
food,
Yeah.
nutrients.
Skimpy gym
Every-
outfits.
Everything to make you look good.
Right, right, right. Okay, so there's of course a risk of following an analogy too far because eventually it
Oh,
breaks
yes.
down. But I've a couple thoughts here. So like, do I have a couple thoughts? Maybe it's just one thought. Let me lay out a bit of groundwork, and then I'm going to check in with you. So the physiotherapist chiropractor that I work with, a
Hmm.
super brilliant guy. I love talking to him. He's like a mad scientist,
Right,
and he talks super quick, and he's always like, "Okay, I'm going to adjust this thing," and all this stuff's happening, and then slowly over time, my injuries miraculously heal. It's very interesting, and he does a lot of work in the fascial layer as well as
yes,
some manipulations. And we were talking, and he was saying, like what happens is our system is in the state it's in for a reason, which is where we start to get into my line of work, ontology, which I'll come to in a sec. It's like it's in that
Mhm.
state for a reason. And what you'll see is like people will come in, they'll see their chiropractor like once a week or whatever, they'll get the manipulation done, but they're not doing anything to treat the underlying reason that that system is in the state it is in the first place. They're just getting
Right,
manipulated, they feel better, but then of course the underlying reasons pull them back into that same previous structure. And so in my line of work, ontology, we talk about like a very simple example would be a tall woman growing up. Tall women get noticed, and for women
Mhm.
to be noticed is often not very rewarding in our society, and in other societies even less. And so one of the things I'd see, or I still see when I'm training leadership and developing this, is women that want to have more of a presence in the room, but they have this underlying story they've learned that it's unsafe to do so, or that if you're tall, you'll blah blah blah. And so they've learned to hunch
Right.
subtly because it detracts from their height, it makes them seem less threatening, blah 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 blah. So I'm curious, because we could do all the work in the world to support that woman's system to straighten up, but if the underlying ontological stories aren't addressed, there's going to be a natural pull back down into that sort of hunched posture. So how does that integrate with your work? Does that philosophy align? You know, speak to that. Say words
Oh,
and
big
hurry up.
time. Yeah. So yeah, postural question. Love these, right?
uh-huh.
Yeah, that hunched back. And posture is involuntary until we think about it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But if you think about it, our moods affect our posture. And
Yeah.
this is how we read people. It's like, oh, you're in a bad mood, or oh, you look tired,
Right.
or you look anxious, or everything else. Like we see these in people's posture. It's that output from the brain.
Yeah.
So yeah, the things that keep us up on our feet and tall and confident in that nice posture is going to be, yeah, our thoughts. But our thoughts, if you think about them, are frontal. We're conscious of it. Our frontal lobes
Some of
fire.
them at least.
Yeah,
Yeah.
frontal lobes fire down, and their major job, though, is inhibition of flexor muscles, of emotionality, of autonomic nervous system, like heart rate, blood pressure. So if you think about it, you come in the world and you're in this fetal posture, that flexed posture.
Yeah.
You start to grow a nervous system and you're able to stand up. Then you're able to walk. And then, yeah, we reach that adulthood where we're kind of standing as close to that as we possibly can. And then as we decline, we start to hunch forward again as
Right.
our brain declines. Or we get injured and we start to see all sorts of different posturing
Yeah.
and,
Adaptations
and
to kind of manage around.
And so it is a complex thing. But yeah, when we're feeling good, of course, yeah, our frontal lobes are going to inhibit flexor muscles better. And we get that nice confident pose. And yeah, we can sort of hack that too. Okay, well, what if we use posture at the same time? Okay, well, we change our posture and we're starting to feel better. Oh, feeling better makes me feel better emotionally too. And now I'm really confident.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's just one good thing leads to the other. That, yeah, this whole idea that emotional and physical are separate are, aren't necessarily the case.
Sure. Yeah. It's
But
a
it,
big holistic
yeah,
system.
yeah. And then in other people, though, we look at posture and we're like, that's a confident person, but they're hunched over. So what's going on? Well, those postural systems between proprioception, so feedback from muscles and joints, balance, our inner ear, and then from eyes, that is a little skewed or off. Okay, so how do we fix that? And then we kind of go through those systems and make those corrections. Now, if something has developed, and this is kind of the case with scoliosis, is that those systems are kind of skewed as the person's developing and growing and developing a skeletal system. So if you have different tonicities of muscles pulling on the skeletal spine as it's growing and moving, then it's going to become twisted and torqued. And then when that skeletal system stops maturing, it's kind of where it's going to be for
Yeah.
the rest of their life. So there's also that aspect to it. And that's one of the more, I would say, newer theories on scoliosis that's starting to get a lot more attention and starting to be looked at, versus, okay, well, what's going on? Well, we don't know. So
Mm.
idiopathic scoliosis versus, okay, well, no, there's a difference.
Idiopathic meaning it's like a function of our thinking, our mind, our thoughts, our own creation, so to speak. Is that right?
Idiopathic just means we don't know.
Oh, I
So it's
see.
got that
Got it.
scientific name, idiopathic, and in health,
Mysterious
like,
scoliosis.
yeah, we like to use big words to
Yeah, hey, you're
explain
not fooling
something
me though.
we don't know anything about.
Right.
And and no, these new theories, and we see it with neurodevelopmental disorders as well, is of course, yeah, there's differences in how the brain's coming online with these kids. And yeah, well, can we make a difference? And absolutely, and we're starting to see it. And there's more and more research building that hypothesis or theory that's starting to show efficacy. And
Okay.
that's really exciting for all these kids that have a lot more potential. And
Uh-huh. So two questions. Question one is, so what I heard the first answer to what I'd asked was sort of like, as you adjust posture, that's going to impact thinking. So sort of a virtuous cycle. One will lead to the other, which will, which is similar to the guy I was talking about who does work with me. His sort of philosophy is often what happens with these chronic injuries is you get an inflammation and then sort of like biting your cheek once, then your cheek becomes inflamed. You bite it again and again and again. And now you just live with a bitten cheek that's swollen. He's like, if we can create space in your musculature and your fascial layer, you can stop having one thing rub against the other. And then the injury can kind of heal itself, so to speak, or the body can do what it's meant to do instead of having this thing in the way that keeps happening. I'm hearing that a bit in the work you're describing. In a way, you create some space and the body can do the natural thing it's there to do. And that's kind of present in my work too. If we get the rule or the story or the underlying belief about self, if we can address that and move that out of the way, then we can come back to this natural innate state of like harmony that
Yes,
we come onto the planet
absolutely.
with.
Right.
Okay. So then the it turns out that wasn't a question. That was just me wanting to say stuff. So I've done that. Number two, the question I do have though is it feels important to speak to one in my line of work, coaching. There's just a ton of bad science of like snake oil, of people that are
Oh
not
yeah.
malicious, they're well intentioned, but they've just decided to become a coach. And I'm a coach. I can coach anyone. I've decided that. And now that's what they're doing. And so there's a lot of like chaff in the profession. And
Hmm.
I would feel a bit remiss if I didn't speak to the fact that like chiropractic has a bit of a maybe sordid or dark or some of that in its space. So can you speak to some of that? Like, how do you reconcile that? Is that present for you? Like, what's some of the shadow side of your profession and your work?
Yeah, and it goes down to, yeah, well, we could get political on different professional organizations and the marketing and the battle that's gone on in all these different professions.
Right.
Um, but yeah, we are becoming more and more evidence based, and
Mm.
that's also the great thing about functional neurology. And what I found in chiropractic school was it had a tool that, yeah, was getting results with all sorts of other conditions other than just neck pain, back pain.
Uh-huh.
And it came up with theories on it that maybe weren't accurate explanations
Yeah.
or something that couldn't be transferred from one case to the next
Yeah.
because it was a stimulation that got somebody better in another realm other than pain,
Uh-huh.
another sensory processing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, why did it do that? Okay, well, here's the theory.
It's
And then why,
idiomatic.
yeah, and then why didn't it work with the next person?
Right.
So that's kind of where it got into issues. And that goes back to that accuracy part too, and being able to figure out the dosage of your stimulation exercise modality or teaching,
Uh-huh.
right? Is that, yeah, you need to get that part right. And we see this in medication or supplement world as well. The dosage is either the cure or the
The
poison.
poison. Yeah.
So it depends whether you actually get that right. And let's go into the story of fish oils because I love this one because
Mm.
most people hear snake oils and well, snake oil salesman, okay, yeah, it just never worked. Well, the original story behind snake oil was, and backtrack to a time period where you showed up to work on the railway in the US, Canada, as a Chinese migrant.
Hmm.
And you're tossed in this world now where you're expected to work pretty much all day. You don't have the same foods. The things that got you better in your home country aren't being used here. And one of the things they were bringing over was this oil from a cold water snake. And it was high in a lot of fatty nutrients, kind of the omega 3s of the day.
Uh-huh.
And they were taking this and noticing health benefits and sharing it with other people. And they were noticing health benefits. And then, of course, the people who wanted to make more money just looked at it as being oil.
Yeah.
Oh,
Commodify it basically.
from a snake. Well, let's just get it from like a rattlesnake then. Should
Hmm.
be the same thing. Well, no, it's not the same thing. It didn't have those fatty nutrients that were abundant in this source.
Right.
And then it just got sold. And then some people probably even mixed in oils that were dangerous and
Yeah.
people were getting sick. And then, and of course, more and more people caught on, oh, we can make money from this. And oh yeah, let's try to sell this and make that
Yeah.
quick buck. And then it developed this horrible reputation. And I see that with a lot of things going wrong in therapies right now is yeah, we're
Yes.
at this cusp where we're trying to make changes. And if we don't do the right things or if we let it get watered down and the results aren't there, then it's going to turn into snake oil.
Yeah.
So it does really need to be this science that starts to get explored more and made precise. And same with the coaching world is yeah,
Indeed.
we're dealing with things that are changing somebody's way of thinking,
Yes. Yeah.
their processing, way of being. And yeah, it can't just be a
Seat of the
protocol that works for
pants.
one person, not the
That's
other,
right.
or
It worked for
let's
this person. They
yeah,
cried.
yeah.
It's such an interesting time. There's a couple thoughts you bring to mind. The first is like one of my friends did his, I think it was his PhD or his master's in ethnobotany, I think. Ultimately, what he ended
Okay.
up doing was he was studying indigenous cultures where a Western medical solution had been imposed upon them, but
Right.
without any of the cultural context that would have it make
Mhm.
sense. So, like the Hawaiian native population, as an example, where their whole culture has like a set of beliefs, and our beliefs are very determinative. You know, and then Western medicine would come and like impose like eat this way, do this thing, jog this many hours a day, do all this, you'll be healthy. And of course, it doesn't take. You know,
Right.
it's sort of like transplanting a plant from Germany here in the soil and being like, why isn't it working? I'm watering it like I do in Germany because it doesn't have the context. And so one, that thought just comes to mind. And then two, I'm present to like we're living in a ancient Chinese curse. I think they say it's like may you live in interesting times, and we are certainly living in
Right.
interesting times. And the science is such a profound discovery. You know, the scientific method is so profound and such a gift. But there's also a degree of caution because when we look at everything through a scientific microscope, it's really a microscope, and we can lose sight of the tapestry. We can just start to see the individual threads. The
Oh,
flip
exactly.
side, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I love what you're saying right there. And you're right, that cultural aspect of things.
Yeah,
And too, that even goes into the system of science. And science isn't perfect. And anybody who
exactly.
believes so is in a belief system versus a scientific one.
That's
And
right.
that is that, yeah, no, science is flawed. And especially the research designs of a lot of studies are flawed, is that, yeah, you're trying to basically boil down as much as you can to one variable.
Yes, which
And that's
is
kind of the random control trial, the RCTs that are like the
yes,
gold standards out there. But you can't do that for a multifactorial system.
that's right.
It
And that
doesn't work
comes to
that well.
the second thing that I want to speak to is so like there's all of that, and then
Yes.
the my people who kind of share the skeptical or the cynical, we could say, like perspective, or the a lot of the brilliant brain that you and I share might be like, well, but hold on, we can't throw science out, and that's also true. Because
That's also
otherwise,
true.
we
Yes.
get into this. Well, science isn't perfect, therefore, I don't need to do any critical thinking or scientific approach. And it's like, nope, we have to learn to find this transcendent next stage where we can use the microscope, but then also zoom out and recognize like you'll miss stuff if you just look at it through that lens. And so it's cool to hear you share about this because I'm hearing a lot of that approach is present in the field that you're working in. Is that your experience?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I use the example too, like a good researcher
Hmm.
is going to, once again, yeah, in his studies, try to boil it down to one factor. So you're taking thousands pieces of information and boiling it down to kind of one thing and how that one thing works.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we're living in a healthcare system that's what's then prescribed
Yes.
or recommended to people.
Yeah.
And I use the other side of it though. A good clinician, practitioner, healer, whatever you want to call them, is going to take one patient and boil 1,000 different
Hmm.
millions of factors into what they can.
Yeah.
So instead of an N of 1,000, an N of one
Hmm.
is their opposites.
For those
A-
listening, and being our
yeah,
sample size.
yeah.
Yeah.
So a good clinician's gonna once again, one patient person in front of them, there's multiple factors, and we're looking at
Yeah.
how many multiple factors can we use to get them better.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Versus the researcher, we've got thousands of people. Let's figure out one thing going wrong with them.
Yeah. And then apply that broadly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
there's a real I mean, I think we live in a time of increasing complexity, even just complexity of input. Like we're
oh yeah,
bombarded with input,
constantly.
visual, yeah. And so, you know, again, fractally speaking, we're not that different from our neurologic system. When we're bombarded with input, we shut down. We don't have the capacity to stay open to it all. And so we look for simplicity, and we
Yes,
look for,
absolutely.
if I can label this person a libtard or a MAGA Republican or a Canadian or an American or whatever, then I can reduce them to a single word, and then I can stop listening. I can shut them out. And I think we're all craving um, like solutions to what ails us of that same ilk. Like just tell me the exact thing. And the beauty of the work I can hear you and I both are doing is there isn't an exact one thing. There's a complexity of a system that we're working with, but that's also why this will actually work. Is because we're not going to give you the one thing that always works. We're going to get clear on what's going on, and we're going to craft to some extent a bespoke solution that will meet you in that.
Yeah,
Uh,
individualized care. I
yes.
love it. Yes. Yeah.
So what are your
And,
thoughts?
too,
Oh, go
like
ahead.
in the coaching realm, and this just popped into my head.
Yeah.
So uh was that I remember going through a coaching program and somebody said, yeah, we want you to boil it down so you can walk away with this with that 2% or 4% factor of something that really changes your life.
Mm.
And I'm like, well, coaching psychology, yeah, if 96, 98% of it doesn't really apply and you're only looking for that little nugget, can we improve that so that
Uh-huh.
the amount of words we say or theories we're trying to teach people is boiled down to that nugget that's going to help them.
Right.
So,
So question here, individualized care, right? Boy, that would be amazing. And we're also in a world where it feels like resources are increasingly stretched. So do you have, I know it's not my domain of expertise and it's probably not yours, but do you have thoughts like, how do we, how do we reconcile what we're talking about, which is like we can't use one size fits all solutions other than to hit like sort of the meaty part of the bell curve, kind of like aspirin will make your pain go away to some extent. We can do that, but beyond that, how do we take something that is bespoke, that is individualized, and then have that meet people in a time when our healthcare systems are stretched to the max? Like, any thoughts on that?
well, actually, you're starting to see it happen, and for instance, the World Economic Forum put in the brain house at the last summit there in Davos.
Uh-huh.
So they're starting to think about it. And then the European Brain Health Commission, I believe, they crunched the numbers and they compared brain disorders, which is a wide range of things from
Sure.
your
Yeah.
neurodevelopmental to your injuries to your
Your
decline.
personality.
Yeah, and mental
That's a
health.
joke. David stepped right over it. People, I don't think your
I,
personality is a disorder. Continue, David, please.
stepped on it. But they compared it to other chronic diseases like cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. And there's
Uh-huh.
overlap. All of these
Right.
is the amount spent on brain disorders actually dwarfs all three of those others combined
Wow, that's quite significant. Those are huge, huge
numbers.
spent expenses. Yeah.
And you're starting to see it in the chaos happening in the US right now. Is we're in a period of disruption and healthcare and
Yeah.
education are those two big entities that need disruption and need change. They're
Uh-huh.
old systems. The can's been kicked down the road too long now
Yeah.
and need change. Um, but yeah, for brain disorders, brain health, something going wrong or not right, that right now is $3 to $5 trillion industry
Wow.
globally. And the loss of productivity
Hmm.
and the potential to have people perform at another level is $16 trillion.
Hmm. You got a 6x or something like that.
So, yeah, we've got brain health where something is, once again, not optimal, something's going wrong, not right. And then brain capital is kind of like that performance. Well, how do we turn this into an economic system that's going to benefit humanity and get things going?
Huh.
So those are the two terms being tossed around there, and there's starting to be those global conversations around it. Um, so yeah, it would actually start to help the burden on the healthcare system if we're able to start getting healthy. The thing is, there's going to be this period where we need to actually invest in it, which is going
Yeah.
to be costly in a system that's already costing us too much money.
Yeah.
So a lot of the start will be, okay, what's the low hanging fruit? Well, the lowest hanging fruit is our food supply.
Yeah. I,
Like,
well, I
let-
also I also think like part of for any breakthrough to happen in a system, and by breakthrough I mean something other than just incremental change. And what we're
Mhm.
talking about is a breakthrough in the health system. It's not just, well, we'll just add a little bit more of a line item to this about brain health or whatever. Every
Right.
breakthrough requires a breakdown because it takes something, what we're talking about is like this idea, okay, it costs 3.5 trillion currently. If we invest in it, it'll cost however much, but then on the backside we end up with 16 trillion. Like, what a huge growth. So it's kind
Right.
of like,
Exactly.
hey, we're selling $100 bills for $80. How many of these do you want? And that sounds great. The trouble with this sort of stuff is that the $100 bill comes later down the road. It's tougher for people to get to. It requires overcoming some resistance. We're not very good at long-term thinking. And so I feel kind of on some level, our medical systems are going to have to hit that wall and fall to pieces before we can really see, maybe not quite that drastic, but some kind of breakdown before we see like a real kind of shift where this becomes our focus.
Yeah, and that's why healthcare is such a hot topic right now.
Yeah.
And I mean hot because controversial or whatever. Everybody's got their opinion on what's going to change, but these are system approaches that require governance and planning
Yeah.
and two, it's also yeah, a huge economic thing. Like to go in there and disrupt it or blow the system up. It, there's not a government on the planet who would be like, yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. I'm not interested in being reelected.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It
exactly.
requires some
So,
either great courage, which our political parties are not really models of, or, the moment meeting the party, basically. This
yeah.
is happening now. Yeah.
And yeah, there's so much, once again, yeah, money being passed around. And yeah, the US is obviously the example of paid advertising,
Hmm.
paid campaign donations, everything there.
Yeah.
So it's the disruption happening in the world is actually system and governance. And that's not really kind of being discussed at a large level.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
We've got 5 minutes left, so I just want to make sure we give you a chance, like give people a chance to find you, to learn more about your work. So, like, where I know there's your podcast, so tell us a bit about that and the kind of guests you have on and the conversations you're having, and also share like if people want to find more about your work or whatever, how do they do that?
Yeah, the podcast, the title of it is The Hardy Brain. So my last name and brain. And
Hardy with a D, Hardy. Uh-huh.
yeah. And I have amazing guests on the show like Adam Quiney. And we we just try to have fun conversations and geek out about things. So
Uh-huh.
I'm lucky I the caliber of people on the show is just blown my mind. Like I've
Mm.
had athletes, Olympic professional, to clinicians, to authors, to leaders, and it just constantly. I'm almost starstruck at some of the interviews, or interviewing people that are just brilliant
Mm.
and just being curious of what others have to say is kind of the goal of the whole show and have fun with it. So
Such a gift. Yeah.
yeah, it's been a blast.
Okay, so there's your podcast. Do you have any books?
No books at this present time,
Okay.
and
Planning to
then
write
yeah,
one?
been planning a while, so it's
Right.
I'll put it together. Yeah.
There's people that have written books and there's people that are planning to write books.
Oh, exactly. And that
Uh-huh.
goes into AI. Like it's going to be my word calculator.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it can make things more efficient for myself. And but
Indeed.
I get sidetracked there. That's probably another show. And then uh, and then yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's the one I spend the most time on. But I've got Instagram, Facebook as well,
Cool.
and soon to add X and probably TikTok as well. So we'll have all of them.
Do you have a website?
Absolutely. So it's
Yeah.
the hardybrain.ca.
Perfect. Okay, great. Hardybrain.ca. So definitely go check out David's work. It's fascinating. Thank you, David. Like it's really one of the things that's most thrilling to me. I'm going to try to make this succinct. Six thoughts just blossomed into, more. One of the things I've learned through my work with plant medicine is this fact that like in the West, we don't have really a distinction for medicine. We have a distinction for drug. And a drug is something you take and it stabilizes you, which is very, very important. But then it doesn't help you heal. It doesn't help you change the underlying stuff. It just stabilizes on the surface. And then over time, you need more of the drug. You become more dependent on it, blah, blah, blah. We all know how that goes. And so we all have a very skeptical eye whenever there's a system that purports to actually support you to feel better, or when we see someone continually taking on a particular flavor of work, we're like, oh, it sounds like you're addicted to something. And that's because we don't have this context from medicine, which is like something that supports us to actually heal what's going on at the level of the cause, as opposed to at the level of
Yeah.
the symptom. And so I'm really like delighted every time I get to talk to someone like you and discover like, wow, there's more medicine out there than we realize. And there's people working in various fields that are really standing for that side of the distinction. So thanks for sharing your brilliance with us. Thanks for everything you put into the space. And thanks for doing the work that you're doing. It sounds like it must be thrilling to see the expression on people's faces as they start to like open their spasticated hand or, turn their head or whatever it happens to be.
It's been a journey. It's yes.
Uh-huh. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. We're going to wind down there. Anything you want to plug that you're up to before we close out? Anything coming up?
Anything coming up? Once again, I'd say it's probably next episodes of the Hardy Brain, my podcast, and
Cool.
then do if someone's interested in it, in kind of more the physical side of the coaching that they just want to be directed, then reach out as well.
Awesome. Cool. Reach out to David. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.